Hey guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and I have got a book that I want to talk to you guys about. Wolverine and the X-Men, Volume 2, written by Jason Aaron with art by Nick Bradshaw and Chris Bachalo. Nick Bradshaw does the first 3 issues in this, and then Chris Bachalo does the last issue. And basically, this kind of picks up right where Volume 1 leaves off. You've got the Hellfire Club kids who were... It looks like they're going to be kind of the main antagonists for this entire series. And as I mentioned in my review of Schism yesterday, they got their introduction in that book, and then that book was kind of the backdoor pilot for Wolverine and the X-Men. And it's looking like, based on this volume and last volume, Volume 1 that is, that they are going to be the main antagonists for this entire series. Which is very good because, you don't often, in series that feature teenage superheroes, like Teen Titans or Young Avengers, or any of the X-Men books that had teenage superheroes, like the New Mutants or Generation X, you don't often get to see teenage supervillains. The only time I can really think of that being done would be in the New Mutants series, where the Hellions were kind of sort of the rivals for the New Mutants, and even then, they came to blows quite often, but they weren't full-on villains for the New Mutants. It was really more the Hellfire Club who were villains for the X-Men, but the New Mutants weren't full-on enemies with the Hellions. They didn't like each other, but they weren't necessarily enemies. Here, it's really interesting that we're going to get to see villains who are about the same age as the kids, even though in the first 2 volumes that hasn't really been a thing yet. At the end of this volume, we do get to see the new Lords Cardinal of the Hellfire Club. They see that they are going to have to strike against the student body of the Wolverine School in order to bring down the school, and that's kind of their big goal for this whole series. So it's really interesting. I'm really glad that Jason Aaron is creating new enemies for the X-Men, because far too often I will see writers, they will jump into the X-Men and either A, they will create brand new enemies who are not interesting at all, or B, they will just reuse the same 3 enemies from before, like Magneto, Apocalypse, and Mr. Sinister, and those stories aren't really going to work either because we've seen those enemies so many times before that they've kind of gotten old and stale. Very rarely they can take those characters and put a new spin on them and make them work in a new way. But most of the time when they're just taking these older villains who we've seen since before I was born and they're just reusing those characters in the same way, that doesn't work. And if you create brand new villains, you really have to put a lot of thought into those villains, give them motivations that make sense, and make them interesting characters. And so far, we haven't seen a whole lot of this new Hellfire Club. A couple of them are really interesting to me, a couple of them less so. One of them, his family has built their fortune on slave trading across the galaxy, and I wouldn't have even known that if I was just reading Wolverine and the X-Men, but then that little bit of backstory was given in X-Men Schism, and I thought that was a very interesting thing for a villain to do, I guess. I thought it was a very a niche shtick for a villain to have. I wouldn't have known that if that wasn't mentioned in X-Men Schism, so maybe that could have been mentioned a little bit here. And frankly, if you didn't read X-Men Schism and you are reading the series, it's going to be a lot of fun to read this, specifically seeing all of the interactions between the staff and the student body at the school, but you won't really get a whole lot going on with the villains. You're not really going to know what's going on with them. Yes, we do find out that Cade Kilgore is a businessman and he's 13, and that's about all we know. We really don't know anything about his colleagues, and so I would say if you have been reading Wolverine and the X-Men, or you've read this entire run, and you're just kind of getting a meh impression from the villains, maybe go back and read Schism so that you can get a little bit more about them. And for all I know, maybe in later volumes of this series, we will get more about these villains. I think that would be really interesting to get a little bit more fleshed out on all of them. I would really like to see that happen. So getting back to the actual premise, which is the staff members and the student body, and not so much talking about the villains and stuff, basically this book, there's 2 things going on. Number 1, you've got the school is running out of money because at the end of Volume 1, they had to rebuild the school after they had just built it, and so Iceman is saying, look, we have absolutely no money at all, and Warren Worthington III, he has amnesia, so we can't really use Worthington Enterprises or Industries or whatever it is, we can't really use his company to fund the school anymore, and so we're kind of going to need to find some money like now. So Wolverine and Quentin Quire go to an intergalactic casino, there they are, and you can see like the aliens and stuff. They go to an intergalactic casino. Basically, Wolverine brings Quentin so that he can help him count cards, and they're just going to win like a quintillion amount of dollars, and then they'll go back to Earth, and then they'll have plenty of money to fund the school. Meanwhile, while all of that is going on, if you read Volume 1 of Wolverine and the X-Men, you know that Kitty Pryde is pregnant, and it turns out she is pregnant with a bunch of microscopic brood. And so, through a series of circumstances that I won't really get into, the X-Men and one of the students go inside Kitty Pryde to fight all of the brood. And that is all a whole lot of fun. If you're interested in the movie, not 20,000 Leagues, what is that? Fantastic Voyage. If you're interested in the story, The Fantastic Voyage, which I think is a novel and a movie, if you're interested in that story, this is kind of like that, but with superheroes and aliens. And it's really incredibly fun. And speaking of fun, I was reading this, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that on every single page, there is at least one line of really fun, quirky dialogue. At least once a page, there's one line that made me laugh out loud. And that may be a stretch, maybe not quite on every page, but this book is so full of funny, hilarious dialogue, on the nose, just absolutely spot-on character stuff. When Beast says something funny, it sounds like Beast. It doesn't sound like just a generic character. Beast is saying something funny. And when Wolverine says something funny, he is saying something funny. It's not just funny dialogue that's been put into Wolverine's mouth. It sounds like Wolverine. And it's like that throughout this whole book. There is so much funny stuff. If I had an entire video just to talk about all of the stuff in this book that made me laugh, it would probably be a 10 or 15 minute video just talking about all of that stuff. It is really fun. I was talking yesterday about how I liked that the X-Men Schism book allowed us to have X-Men teaching at the school again. And I mentioned very briefly that I missed having an X-Men series that was fun, because for far too often, the X-Men books just weren't that fun anymore. And this book is incredibly fun, even when the stakes are high, and you can definitely see at the end of this volume that the stakes are getting higher as the Hellfire Club is setting their sights on the school. The stakes are high, but it's still fun. This book isn't afraid to have a little fun and be a little bit goofy, and I love that so much. This is definitely, so far anyway, this is definitely a run of X-Men stories that I am going to be rereading many times in the future. I want to talk about the art a little bit. Nick Bradshaw only did one issue in Volume 1, and Chris Bachalo did 3 issues. Now it's the reverse. Nick Bradshaw did 3 issues in this volume, and Bachalo only did 1 volume. I've known Bachalo since I started reading X-Men comics, basically, because when I started reading X-Men comics in the early 2000s, one of the series that I latched onto when I found them in the back issue bins was the Generation X series, specifically the first 25-ish issues of Generation X, and Chris Bachalo drew a lot of that run. And I've always loved Chris Bachalo. He's had many different runs on the X-Men. Around this time, there was an adjectiveless X-Men series going on, and he drew a couple of storylines from that. He had quite a bit of the first, I'd say the first third of Mike Carey's run on X-Men Legacy, or the series that would eventually become X-Men Legacy. He drew quite a bit of that, and he's drawing quite a bit of this run. Nick Bradshaw, however, is a guy who I have never heard of before, and he kills it here. It is really awesome that this series was able to find 2 different artists who both are able to do their own thing, but it's not a situation where when one artist leaves and the other artist comes on, I'm like, oh no, can't we have Bachalo again? They are both awesome, and I like them both. I don't mind saying, way back when Mike Carey first started his run on X-Men, you had Chris Bachalo, and then you would jump over to Humberto Ramos. Now, I like Humberto Ramos on certain books. For example, he is absolutely perfect for The Runaways, and then I believe he drew some Impulse in the 90s. So he is perfect for those kind of series, but then on X-Men, I didn't ever want Humberto Ramos to be on the book. I just wanted it to be Chris Bachalo. So every time Humberto Ramos came on board, I was like, can we have more Chris Bachalo? I'm not having that here. This is Nick Bradshaw and Chris Bachalo, and they are both awesome, and every time either one of them is on board, I am totally on board with it. They are both killing it, and I really love what they are doing here. And I'll be really sad when one or both of them leave this book, because I'm not certain that both of them stick with this series all the way to the end of this run. I really hope that they do, but I don't know if they do or not, because I haven't looked that far ahead. So that's about all I have to say. I will say, the subplot with Wolverine and Quentin Quire in outer space at that casino, it is a lot of fun, but ultimately that subplot proves to be just a big waste of time, because As they're coming home, we find out, oh, they didn't get to take any of that money home because they got beaten up by some aliens. And then it's like, oh, guess what? Our problems are solved anyway. Wolverine and Quentin Quire didn't really have to go into outer space because we've got a solution to funding the school now, and we didn't need them to go into outer space. Okay, so that whole subplot that's been going on for 3 issues kind of feels like a big waste of time. It was a lot of fun, but it feels like a little bit of a waste of time. That's my one complaint about this book. I literally don't think I have any other complaints about this. This series is shaping up to be, like I said when I reviewed Volume 1, it's shaping up to be one of my top 5 X-Men runs so far. I'm very much looking forward to reading the next volume in this series, which I will be reviewing next week. So, that's all I have to say about this book. I will talk to you guys tomorrow with a different kind of video. So, until then, I'll catch you guys later. Have a great day.